2 years before the day her life collapsed for a second time, Margaret Maggie Nguyen had been a woman with almost everything people spend their lives chasing. She had a husband, Thomas Nguyen, who loved her with the quiet devotion of a man who had built a life beside her, not in front of her. Together they had turned one small faux shop in Sacramento into Home Viet, a restaurant chain with 12 locations across the West Coast. They had 2 grown children, Jennifer, a medical resident at Johns Hopkins, and Kevin, a newly graduated software engineer in Washington, D.C. They had a house above San Francisco Bay, a respected name, and enough money that no ordinary problem could touch them. Then Thomas died. The police called it an accident. They said he might have suffered a heart attack or fallen asleep while driving home from the warehouse in Reno. His pickup struck the median on Interstate 80, rolled twice, and crashed into a steel signpost. Maggie received the call at 2:45 in the morning. She remembered the sheriff's careful voice, the phone slipping from her hand, the screen cracking against the bathroom tile, and then a silence so heavy it felt like concrete pressing against her chest. At Thomas's funeral, more than 2,000 people came to St. Patrick's Church. Chefs sent flowers. The mayor sent condolences. The newspaper called Thomas the man who brought Vietnamese flavors to America. Maggie stood beside the casket hearing people tell her to be strong, but the words sounded far away. The only thing that felt close was the empty space where Thomas should have been. The person who stepped into that empty space was her brother, Robert Nguyen. Robert held her in front of the altar and promised, "I'm here for you. I'll handle everything." For the first few weeks, he did. He handled insurance papers, lawyers, relatives, calls Maggie could not bear to answer. Robert had always been charming, persuasive, and careful with appearances. In grief, that control felt like protection. Robert's wife, Catherine Blackwood Nguyen, was different. She came from old Boston money and carried herself like every room owed her obedience. She was beautiful, polite, and cold in a way Maggie had never been able to name. At the funeral, Catherine touched Maggie's shoulder and said Thomas's death was a loss that could never be compensated. Maggie noticed Catherine's eyes drop when she said it. A small thing. A strange thing. But grief teaches people to ignore small alarms. 3 months later, Robert began pressing Maggie about Costa Rica. There was an investment, he said, a luxury resort called Paraiso del Pacifico, led by a polished businessman named Diego Morales. Robert sent financial projections, articles, and interviews. He said Thomas would have loved the project. He said idle money attracted danger. He said this was how Maggie could protect the legacy Thomas had built. Maggie hesitated. Robert visited on Sundays with numbers and reassurance. Catherine visited on Wednesdays with flowers, pastries, and soft sympathy. One day she brought Maggie a blue cashmere scarf from Italy. "Thomas always liked you in blue," Catherine said. Maggie thanked her, but something inside her tightened. Thomas had always liked her in white. Catherine should not have known otherwise. Still, Maggie was lonely, exhausted, and desperate to believe that at least one person in her family was truly helping her. Before agreeing to sign anything, Maggie took the papers to David Park, the Nguyen family's longtime lawyer. Mr. Park read the documents in his San Francisco office and warned her that the clauses were too broad. If she signed, he said, she might be transferring control of her assets to a person or company she did not really know. Maggie told Robert. 2 days later, Mr. Park called back. His voice sounded different, flat and frightened. He said he had reviewed the papers again and perhaps had been too cautious. A week later, he vanished. His phone was disconnected. His emails bounced. His office was closed. Robert said Park had health issues and had gone on leave. Robert had already found a new lawyer. And Maggie believed him, because grief made belief easier than suspicion. She believed him until Samuel Adeyemi walked into a conference room in Costa Rica and said, "Ma'am, do not sign the papers on the table." Samuel Adeyemi was not merely a driver. He had been born in Lagos, Nigeria, the son of a civil engineer and a mathematics teacher. As a boy, Samuel had what his father called an engineer's eye. He could look at a structure and understand where it carried weight, where it was weak, and where it would break. He became a civil engineer, rose quickly, and by 30 was managing bridge and road projects worth millions. Then he discovered the wrong truth. In 2012, Samuel inspected a bridge built by a subsidiary of Blackwood Corporation. He found weak concrete, substandard steel, and missing reinforcement. His calculations showed the bridge would eventually collapse. Officials ignored him because they had been paid to ignore him, so Samuel gave the report to the press. Blackwood denied everything. Samuel was fired, sued, threatened, and one night a bomb exploded outside his home. He left Nigeria with a suitcase, an engineering degree America would not recognize, and a family he still needed to protect. In Houston, Samuel drove for Uber and Lyft while sending money to his wife Amara and their children, David and Nadia. He read during waits between passengers, real estate, corporate law, fraud, money laundering. Most people treated him as invisible, and invisibility taught him things. People spoke freely in back seats when they believed the driver did not matter. Robert hired Samuel through Elite Car Service to drive Maggie. During their first meeting, Robert asked, "Do you speak English?" "Yes, sir," Samuel said. Fluently. Robert smiled and said he would tell Maggie that Samuel did not understand English, for family reasons. Samuel understood at once. Robert wanted a driver who could hear nothing. Someone who heard nothing could not become dangerous. Samuel accepted the job because he needed the money, but also because he recognized a crack in Robert's plan. For 2 months, Samuel pretended not to understand. He opened doors, carried bags, smiled, nodded, and listened. Maggie treated him better than most clients. She asked whether he had eaten. On his birthday, she gave him money for his children. She noticed him when others did not. That mattered. Then Samuel heard Robert on the phone in the back seat. Robert said everything was going according to plan. Maggie trusted him. Catherine was preparing the paperwork. When Maggie signed in Costa Rica, the assets would transfer into their accounts. Thomas's lawyer was handled. Jennifer and Kevin were far away. And the driver, Robert laughed, did not know a word of English. Samuel kept driving. If he exposed himself too soon, Robert would replace him and Maggie would lose the only witness she had. So Samuel waited. He recorded calls, photographed texts, captured documents when Robert left screens unlocked, and prepared for the moment when silence would no longer protect anyone. The trip to Costa Rica felt wrong from the beginning. Maggie sat in business class, unable to sleep, while Robert and Catherine whispered 2 rows behind her. Samuel, in economy, sent a message to Pastor James, a retired Houston police officer now serving a church in San Jose. "I need your help. Could be dangerous." Pastor James replied, "I'm in." At the hotel, Robert told Maggie the signing would take place the next morning at a downtown law office. Catherine smiled and said it would be a wonderful day. As she turned away, Maggie glimpsed 2 words on Catherine's phone: wire transfer. Maggie told herself she was tired. That night, Maggie sat alone with the last family photo taken before Thomas died. She whispered to the picture, asking him for a sign. A small brown bird landed on the balcony railing, looked at her through the glass, then flew into the darkness. Maggie wondered if grief was making her see messages where none existed. She did not know that, on a rooftop across the street, a man with binoculars had just sent a message: "Target in room 412. Alone." Samuel did not sleep either. Before dawn, he walked the hotel and surrounding streets. He saw a black SUV parked across from the hotel with 2 men inside. He saw a man in a black polo shirt and earpiece watching the lobby stairs. Samuel texted Pastor James that Maggie was being watched. Pastor James answered that he was at the cafe across from the law office. If anything happened, Samuel should run there. The next morning, the group arrived at a 6-story building on Central Avenue. From the street, the law office looked respectable. Inside, Samuel noticed details that told another story. No receptionist. No ringing phones. No exit lights. No fire extinguishers. 2 men in black polo shirts stood near the conference room, both with wrist tattoos Samuel recognized from organized crime networks. Through the cracked door, Samuel saw a thick stack of papers, a Mont Blanc pen, and a satellite phone lying face down. This was not a law office. It was a trap. Inside the conference room were Maggie, Robert, Catherine, a man calling himself Attorney Castillo, and Diego Morales. Diego looked polished, calm, and expensive. He spoke about opportunity, legacy, and Thomas as if he had known him. Castillo described the document as a resort investment, $50 million into escrow, 15% ownership, and lifetime use of a luxury villa. Robert assured Maggie everything had been checked. Diego placed the pen before her. From the doorway, Samuel saw the real title on the papers, irrevocable power of attorney and asset transfer authorization. If Maggie signed, she would not be investing in a resort. She would be surrendering control over the restaurants, real estate, bank accounts, and everything Thomas had built with her. Maggie picked up the pen. Samuel opened the door. Robert leapt up, furious, but Samuel ignored him and looked directly at Maggie. In clear English, he said, "Ma'am, do not sign the papers on the table." The room froze. Maggie stared at him. "You speak English?" "Fluently, ma'am." "Give me 5 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and never say another word." Robert shouted that Samuel was only a driver. Catherine demanded Robert control him. Diego's eyes moved toward the door. But Maggie slowly put down the pen. 5 minutes, she said. Samuel laid his phone on the table. First, he showed Maggie Robert's text, "Maggie will sign on Friday. Prepare the account." Then he showed her a copy of the real document. The recipient of the power of attorney was not the resort. It was Blackwood Holdings LLC, a Delaware company represented by Catherine Blackwood Nguyen. Maggie's hands trembled. "Blackwood Holdings," she said to Catherine. "That's your name." Catherine's face paled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Maggie, sweetheart, this isn't what you think." "Then explain it," Maggie said. "If I sign, I lose everything." Samuel interrupted before Catherine could twist the truth. "Ma'am, this is not only about money." Then he told her what he had heard 2 days before Thomas died, Robert saying the car had been handled, the brake system would fail after 50 miles, and someone needed to make sure Thomas took a long drive Thursday night. Samuel opened the audio file. Robert's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Maggie listened once, twice, 3 times. The first time, her mind refused it. The second time, she recognized Robert's cadence. The third time, she understood that Thomas had not simply failed to come home. He had been sent to his death. She stood and looked at her brother. "Robert, you killed my husband." Robert denied it. He said the recording was fake. But Maggie remembered that Robert had taken Thomas's truck for service 2 days before the crash, claiming he brought it to a shop on Divisadero Street. After the funeral, Maggie had called that shop. They had never seen the truck. "Where did you take it?" Maggie asked. "Where did you take Thomas's car so they could sabotage the brakes?" Robert had no answer. Catherine's mask finally broke. She told Maggie she had too much money and no ability to manage it. Thomas had the brains, Catherine said. Maggie was only the wife who cooked pho. Every false comfort, every visit, every gift had been bait. Maggie saw it then, evil had not arrived shouting. It had brought pastries on Wednesdays and waited for a widow to confuse politeness with love. Then Diego walked to the door and locked it. His voice changed. The polished businessman disappeared. "No one leaves," he said. "Mrs. Nguyen, you have two choices. Sign and live quietly, or refuse and learn what happens when people refuse me." Samuel stepped between Diego and Maggie. "There is a third choice. We walk out." Diego laughed and signaled to the men outside. They entered the room, and Samuel saw the snake and blade tattoo more clearly. Diego was not a resort developer. He was connected to a cartel, and the resort was only a laundering operation. Then Diego showed Maggie photos, men outside Jennifer's home in Baltimore and Kevin's place in Washington. Ordinary streets. Familiar doors. Now poisoned by threat. Maggie screamed. "You will sign," Diego said. "Because your children are reachable." Samuel turned to Maggie. "Look at me. I will get you out, but you have to trust me completely." Maggie looked into the eyes of the man she had thought was invisible and saw the one thing she had not seen since Thomas died: sincerity. "I trust you," she said. Samuel told Diego that Maggie needed a moment and that he would take her to the restroom. Diego allowed it because he believed she had nowhere to run. In the hallway, at a blind corner Samuel had checked earlier, he stopped. He gave Maggie a second phone with emergency numbers and GPS. "When I create the opening, run out the main door, turn right, and go to the cafe across the street. Pastor James is waiting. Do not look back." Maggie asked what he would do. Samuel gave a small, brave smile. "I'm going to keep them busy." Maggie ran. Behind her, Robert shouted and Diego ordered his men after her. Samuel moved to the main electrical box he had noticed that morning, opened it, and cut the main cable with a folding knife. The building plunged into darkness. Diego's men had weapons and numbers, but darkness belonged to the man who had memorized the structure. Samuel moved through the hallway and down the emergency stairwell by touch and memory. In the basement garage, a masked man waited beside the Land Cruiser with a gun. "Drivers shouldn't understand English," the man said. Samuel looked at him calmly. "You people talk too much." He charged. 2 shots hit concrete. Samuel rolled left, slammed into the man, twisted his gun hand, and punched him down. He took the Glock but did not fire. Then he jumped into the Land Cruiser, found the keys exactly where he had seen them earlier, and drove out as Diego reached the garage screaming orders. Samuel cut through San Jose traffic using buses as cover and side streets as pressure valves. Minutes later, he reached the cafe. Maggie was inside with Pastor James, alive, clutching the second phone. When Samuel entered, she ran to him and hugged him. For a moment, Samuel could not speak. Someone had seen him, not as a driver, not as an immigrant, but as a human being. But safety lasted only seconds. Samuel told Maggie to call Jennifer. A man answered instead. Jennifer, he said, was unavailable. If Maggie wanted her daughter to remain healthy, she would return and sign within 24 hours. Samuel took the phone. "You made the biggest mistake of your life." The man laughed. "What mistake?" "You thought a driver who doesn't speak English wasn't dangerous." Samuel hung up and laid out the problem. They had 24 hours to find Jennifer and Kevin, prove what Robert and Diego had done to Thomas, protect Samuel's family, and turn Robert from mastermind into pawn. Robert had built the trap, only someone who understood it could help dismantle it. Maggie asked why Samuel was risking his life for her. Samuel thought of Amara in Houston, of David and Nadia growing older while he drove strangers through American streets. "If I disappear like David Park," he said, "who protects my family? I can't protect them from here. But I can protect you. Maybe by doing that, someone will protect them for me." Pastor James then received news from his lawyer. Blackwood Holdings was tied to several other companies, including Blackbridge Security in Houston, a firm under investigation for deaths made to look like accidents or suicides. One of those deaths was David Park. The missing lawyer had been found in a canal with a head wound that did not fit suicide. Samuel saw the blueprint clearly: Robert, Catherine, Diego, Blackwood Holdings, Blackbridge Security, Thomas's sabotaged brakes, David Park's murder, and now Jennifer and Kevin as hostages. This was not fraud. It was a machine built to steal assets and erase witnesses. Then Samuel asked Pastor James to find out whether Blackwood Holdings was connected to Blackwood Corporation in Boston. Pastor James asked why. "Because Blackwood Corporation destroyed my life in Nigeria," Samuel said. "And now the same name is trying to kill Mrs. Nguyen. I won't let them do it again." Samuel's phone rang from a Baltimore number. A frightened whisper came through. "Brother Samuel." It was Jennifer. She was blindfolded. She could hear water, ambulance sirens, and footsteps. Then the call cut off. Samuel opened a map of Baltimore. Water, ambulance sirens, Johns Hopkins. Near the hospital and the Patapsco River, he found an old industrial zone by a boat dock. Abandoned warehouses. A perfect place to hide someone. "Your daughter is near the dock by Johns Hopkins," he told Maggie. For the first time, Maggie's eyes sparked with something harder than hope. "Take me to my daughter." But Diego would have people at the airport, the border, and probably the hotel. Ordinary escape was impossible. Samuel turned to Pastor James. "Do you have a boat?" Pastor James did. Then he asked if Samuel knew how to drive one. Samuel almost laughed. "I grew up in Lagos on the Atlantic coast. I could sail before I could ride a bike." Before they could leave, a man in a gray suit entered the cafe. He introduced himself as Attorney David Chen and said he represented a friend of Thomas Nguyen. He handed Maggie an envelope. She recognized Thomas's handwriting before she opened it. The first line read, "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm gone. And it means I was right, someone wants to hurt you." Thomas had known. Thomas had prepared something. But before Maggie could read more, Pastor James looked through the window and saw two black SUVs racing toward the cafe. "Back exit," Samuel said. "Now." They ran through the kitchen into an alley: Maggie, Samuel, Pastor James, and Attorney Chen. Brakes screamed at the front. Diego shouted in Spanish. Gunfire cracked, and a bullet struck the brick wall near Samuel's head. Maggie lost a heel and ran barefoot, stones cutting her feet, but she barely felt the pain. Thomas's letter was in Samuel's hand, and in her mind it burned like proof that her husband had not left her defenseless. They reached an old marina. Pastor James pointed to a small motorboat with peeling white paint. Samuel checked the engine, fuel, and cables in seconds, started it, and helped everyone aboard. The boat pulled away into dark water as Diego and his men reached the dock. Diego did not chase. He raised his phone. Samuel's phone rang. Diego's voice came through, stripped of charm. He knew they were on the boat. He knew Attorney Chen was with them. He knew about Thomas's letter. He said he had people everywhere. "Bring Mrs. Nguyen back," Diego said. "Let her sign. I will let everyone live." Maggie took the phone. "I will not sign. I will find out the truth about Thomas, and I will bring you, Robert, and Catherine to justice." Diego laughed. "You have no one." "I have Samuel," Maggie said. There was a pause. Then Diego gave Samuel's wife's name, his children's names, and their apartment in Houston. If Maggie did not sign within 24 hours, Diego would send people there. Samuel stared at the black water as the call ended. For the first time in years, a tear slipped down his face. He imagined Amara leaving the hospital after a night shift. David pretending to be brave. Nadia opening the apartment door. The threat cut deeper than anything aimed at his own body. Maggie placed a hand on his shoulder. "I won't let anyone hurt your family. But first, We survive. Samuel wiped the tear. We will. Every structure has a weak point. Every plan has a gap. Ahead, across the dark water, the lights of a cargo vessel moved through the night. Pastor James said it was a Panamanian ship and would not stop for them. Samuel looked at the ship like an engineer looking at a bridge. A ship meant radios, logs, crew members, witnesses, public record. Diego's private hunt feared witnesses more than weapons. We don't need it to stop, Samuel said. We need it to see us. When it sees us, everything changes. For the first time since Thomas died, Maggie felt hope. Fragile, dangerous hope, but hope. On shore, Diego called a number in Miami. The woman got away, he said. And the driver is not a driver. The voice on the other end answered, find him. When you find him, kill him. In Baltimore, Jennifer sat tied to a chair in a dark room while two men guarded the door. One answered a phone, listened, and told the other, boss says if the mother doesn't sign in 24 hours, we begin. Jennifer did not know what begin meant, but the word turned her blood cold. In Washington, Kevin sat blindfolded in a warehouse near the Anacostia docks. A man took Kevin's phone and sent Maggie one message, Mom, help me. Out on the Pacific, Maggie did not yet know about the message. She held Thomas's unopened letter against her chest while Samuel steered toward the lights of the ship. Behind them were betrayal, murder, and a fortune powerful people were willing to kill for. Ahead were hostages, hidden evidence, and enemies with names, money, and guns. But the truth, like justice, needed the living to carry it. And that night, between Costa Rica and Panama, a grieving widow and a driver the world had mistaken for invisible fought to survive, not for money, not for revenge alone, but for Thomas, for Jennifer, for Kevin, for Amara, David, and Nadia, and for every truth powerful people thought they could bury. The war had only just begun.